y'all, we're gonna go ahead and get started. You are joining, come in, have a seat, get ready. I have enjoyed conversations with these three over the last couple of days, and I'm sure you will too. We have a lot to talk about. Let me go ahead and say hi to all the USC folks. I see y'all joining in here, all the alumni. Jeff, if I don't say hi to them, they'll heckle me, so I have to go ahead and say something.
Fair enough.
So, I'd like to start off a little bit about the company Usability Sciences. So first of all, I'm Adrienne Gillard, the Chief Operating Officer / researcher for Usability Sciences. We are a full-service user research firm based in Dallas, Texas. We run the gamut, so evaluative research, generative research, everything in between, international research. We have our multicultural offerings. We work with project managers, designers, and we also work with other research teams. So if you need us, give us a call. We love to talk everything research. I'll stop with my commercial. Let me stop here because I'm going to look up here a video in just a second. So if you've been kind of following us on social media, you know that I've been super geeked out about this talk for a while. Many of you know the three panelists that we have on here essentially created the space we love today. Jeff Schueler professionally and personally me down this path, and this is an exciting talk to have. So I'm gonna let them do all of the talking. Now, to get ready for this talk, they did us a huge favor and found some clips. So let me kind of take you back to where they're going to take us from. Okay. So there we go.
This is the real thing. A user testing new software from Lotus Development Corporation in June of last year ran into trouble when the program told him to type text here.
What am I doing wrong? Where do I get the cursor to type the text? No help, huh?
Lotus changed the prompt to read, click here to type presentation title.
In subsequent usability testing then, when users read those prompts, it was very easy and obvious for them that all they had to do was come up, click the mouse once, and they were presented with a text cursor, at which point in time they could begin typing the title of their presentation.
Shuler's company charges about $10,000.
All right, did everybody enjoy that video as much as I did? So let me go ahead and get into it. So these wonderful panelists, if we could take turns and introduce yourselves. Let's start with Janice over there. Can you tell everybody about you, who you are, what you're doing?
So I'm Janice James, and for the past year, I've actually been involved in been very focused on building a smart and hopefully usable house. Prior to that, I worked for General Dynamics for about a year, and then prior to that, I was working as a consultant.
Okay, and Janice, when did you get started in UX or usability? Okay.
So I was working for a company in 1986 in Dallas, a mid-sized company, and I was managing a group of documentation specialists. And we had started being involved with working with the software and engineers to make the user interface more usable. At that time, the developers weren't really keen on us helping them too much because everything was their responsibility. The user interface design, which we didn't call it user interface design at that point, but they were doing that, everything. And so we continued working with the the developers as much as we could, but then we developed a new position called user advocate, and our focus then was to focus more on the user interface design and try to make the software more usable. I attended a workshop, the very first workshop that Bill Schneiderman held at the University of Maryland. And I met someone there from IBM, and they were talking about their usability labs. And I was really intrigued and became very interested. So when we got back to Dallas, I organized a group of software engineers, managers, and we went to visit the labs in Las Colinas. Little did I know that Jeff was actually there at that time, but so she explained how they conducted the test, how they planned for them, how they recruited. And so I just became more and more interested and decided that this was something that we needed to do. And at that time, VP of marketing decided that all of the documentation that we were producing had to be no more than 50 pages. He just made this arbitrary decision. And of course, we knew that reducing the documentation wasn't going to make the products more usable. So anyway, to make a long story short, I rigged up a usability lab and conducted a usability test, had the VP of marketing and product development come and be participants to from beginning to end, opening the box, installing the software and using the product. And it became very easy after that. They were convinced. So we were able to build a usability lab, and I continued to develop the testing procedures for the company and our measures and methods until I left and went to American Airlines. So that's how it started.
Adrian, you're muted.
I'm muted. Mary Beth, can you tell us your story?
Sure. So I'm Mary Beth. I would describe myself now as a positive psychologist and coach. And my pandemic job is I took a position as an interim executive director at our synagogue in Wayland, Massachusetts, which is actually the hardest I've ever worked. And I also think it's all just another extension of usability. I'm still a usability person at heart. I got started because I worked at Lotus Development. Anybody remember Lotus Development? Used 1, 2, 3? Yeah, okay. What happened was either Borland or Microsoft initially started running ads, I think in PC Magazine, that they had done usability tests and proved that their product was way more usable than 1, 2, 3, our spreadsheet. So the then vice president of spreadsheets, that was back when there were vice presidents of spreadsheets at software companies. I don't remember what I was doing. I worked for him. I don't exactly know what I was doing, but I apparently wasn't busy enough. And so he asked me to start finding out what this usability stuff was all about. And so what we ended up doing is we worked with a few different consultants, Jeff being one of them, as well as Jared Spool, as well as American Institutes for Research. Initially, we thought we were going to outsource all of our usability work. And instead, what ended up happening was I sort of sucked the knowledge out of all of these people's brains, and then we brought the we started doing it in-house instead.
Okay. Jeff?
So I'm Jeff Schueler. I'm president and founder of Usability Sciences. I've been doing that for about 33 years. The life before that was with the IBM company. And I had an organization of developers and programmers and analysts, about 40 strong. And we were building applications that were destined for the IBM customer. What IBM was trying to do was to offload our administrative load and make the customer shoulder it. And the customers were happy to do that, by the way, because, working through an administrator was difficult. Anyway, we're building these applications for customer consumption, and we had one teed up, ready to go out the door. And all of a sudden I get this executive fiat that says, thou shalt take it through usability. And I said, what the hell's that? And, they explained to me that you will do this. And so, when something like that comes down, you do it. So I got my leading staff lady to staff this thing out. She took it to the lab, and the first day in the lab, she calls me up and says, you better get down here because we're finding stuff that we had no idea existed. And, it's the classic case where we had IBM developers who've been brought up in the IBM company, and the applications were loaded with IBMEs and acronyms, et cetera, and the customers had no idea what we were talking about. So I was a consumer of usability research with IBM, and then opened the doors of Usability Sciences in December of '88 and became a provider of usability research.
Okay. So what I've been wanting to know is, how did all of y'all meet each other?
Janice, how did you meet me?
So on my quest to learn more about usability testing, after we had visited the IBM Usability Lab, I guess there was an article or something that I saw that you were doing usability testing, that you had opened your new company. And so I asked to come visit you and to see what you were doing. And that was very, right after you had started the company, I think.
You wanted me to hire you.
Yeah. I
didn't have any money.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe that I went down to talk to Jeff to talk about your company doing work for Lotus. And I think you suggested that I go and look at Janice's new spiffy labs at American Airlines, because one of the things we were talking about doing was building some labs. And Janice gave me a lovely tour of a fantastic, you guys spent some ungodly amount of money on that lab.
Ungodly amount of money, yes.
But you also said
$750,000.
which is
how much, Janice?
$750,000.
And these were $1991, right?
1991.
1989, yeah.
And then Janice said, come to the UPA conference. We're having a conference. You should come.
Okay. So I think that's kind of where I started getting in Jeff's business, right? So I saw that picture that I posted, and I was like, Jeff, why does it say that you started UPA? And he was like, oh yeah, because I did. It's like, wait, what? So can y'all tell everybody the story of how UPA even became a thing?
Janice, you ought to start, and I'll fill in the gaps.
So I was working for American Airlines at the time. I started in 1989, and early 1990, the CEO of American Airlines came to visit our lab.
Bob Crandall.
Robert Crandall, yes. And he said at one point I should start a users group. And even though American had spent $750,000 on a lab, they only hired one person, me, to start a usability program. And so I was thinking, right, in my spare time, I'll do that. But he was the CEO, and there was another VP who was going to follow up with me. So I thought I better do something. So I got in touch with Jeff and to see if he wanted to help. And we decided to put a questionnaire together to see if there was any interest. And so at that time, we didn't have email. So we had to mail out, I think we mailed out about 150 questionnaires, got around 50 back. But it was a resounding yes that this new organization that would be more practical oriented, different from what was then Human Factors Ergonomic Society and CHI, that people were very much interested. So I think in 91 or 1990 or 91, we held a meeting at CHI, a birds of a feather session.
Yeah.
There were about 30 to 40 people who came, and we talked about what such an organization would be and what it wouldn't be. And so there were a couple of other people who were key in helping me to figure out what that organization was going to be. And Jack Young from Word Perfect at the Birds of a Feather session said, I think Word Perfect, and I'm sure there's lots of people on the call that haven't even heard of Word Perfect, but he said we would host the first conference. So we had our first conference at Word Perfect. There were about 100 people who attended. It was all in one room. Everyone was attending all of the sessions at the same time. It was very intimate. There was great networking. And so before the conference was even over, being the good competitor that it was, Microsoft said, well, we'll do the next conference. So we had the next conference at Microsoft. And then I think in 1994, we developed the bylaws and became a professional organization called Usability Professionals Association.
And you were president.
Yeah,
you ran it for 5 years, right?
Well, I was the official president then, and served until 1996, chaired the first 4 conferences, and then I stepped down, but I continued to serve on the board until 1999, after we had developed local chapters.
Yeah, and I backed away from it after we got the thing rolling, and Janice and I both. I remember at that Birds of a Feather, you and I are sitting up at the front of the room. We had no idea if anybody was going to show up. Then we get 30 people showed up. We were like, "Whoa, this is great!" Right?
Yeah.
I viewed it as I was afraid of competition, and so I was afraid if I got involved, I'd be giving away trade secrets, and I just kind of backed out of it and let Janice run with it. But gosh, it's a huge organization now, is it not?
I think so. The conferences are very large now. We really, I think in the very beginning, we tried to create a user experience for the conference attendees by hosting the conferences in resort-like locations. We had all our meals together. I mean, there was just great camaraderie, and it was a special experience for everyone during those conferences.
Yeah. I was there for the first couple of, I was there for the first conference, and then I ended up joining the board, not when it was first started, but a year or 2 after that. And I was on the board for about 10 years. I was president for 3.
Janice, somebody put in the chat, good call on the resorts.
Oh, there's Carol.
Resorts. Yeah, it's my favorite part too. I love with San Diego, went to Toronto. Good call. We do enjoy those. Okay. So for the audience, the panelists put together a list of some things that have changed and evolved that might be kind of fun to talk through. So the first thing on that list is recording sessions. So y'all, how has it changed, recording sessions? What were y'all doing back then?
I'll start out. I'll tell you what we were doing. In the early days, you had, we always tested on a PC. So you had the user in front of a PC. You had a camera in their face shooting the headshot, and then you had a camera over their shoulder, believe it or not, shooting an image of the screen. And then you take those feeds and you pop them into a video mixer, and that video mixer would consolidate the images, give you a picture-in-picture if you were lucky. I mean, these things were, they were temperamental. You'd get the feeds coming in, you'd hit about 3 buttons and pray that the monitor would show what you were hoping that it would show. So that was early on, having to shoot camera images of those things was hard. Then some genius came up with a thing called a scan converter. And what that device was doing is it would take a VGA screen and you would plug the scan converter into the back of the computer in the VGA port, and then you'd plug the monitor into the back of the scan converter, into the extension of scan converter. And what that did is it digitally scanned the VGA image, and that became one of your feeds. So now you didn't have to have that camera shooting over the shoulder of the participant or the user, and that was a real godsend. What were you doing for Mary Beth or Janice?
Janice, why don't you go first?
So we had 2 test bays, and we also had a camera that was mounted in the ceiling, focused on the user's face and upper body. I think we were using a scan converter early on, but we had what we called a control room, where we had someone. We had 3 different roles. One was a narrator, one was the person logging the test. We were using Jeff's software called Test Logger, which would allow us to enter codes like frustration, user error, those kinds of things, and type in comments associated. And it also time stamped. And then we had another person who was controlling the cameras. We could do a picture-in-picture and have the person's upper body superimposed over the screen. But so very similar to what Jeff was doing.
Okay.
So I went in a slightly different direction. I didn't like the quality of the scan converters. Sorry.
I said, as she always did.
As I did, yes. So we rigged up this crazy thing where we had the feed. We had a camera on the person's face, and then we had a slave monitor off of the monitor that was in front of the user in a closet, and we had a camera on the monitor in the closet, and we mixed those images. So we were videotaping with a camera, a monitor, and then mixing the images together. But I don't think I ever in my entire career made a highlight video. And I never used any test logging software. I very, very quickly moved to having people in the room with me. And we took notes on Post-it notes, which is sort of a variation. I built on something that I learned from Jared Spool. And it was all sort of rapid iteration and getting the team involved directly. So I recorded hundreds of hours of tapes. I never even looked at a single one.
We had a whole edit suite in which during those days, we really had to spend a lot of time justifying usability. It took me 4 years at American before I was able to hire dedicated staff with specialized skills to do user interface design and usability. The whole concept for the first 4 years was to teach all the product managers how to do their own usability testing. And so we oftentimes had to make highlight tapes where we would go through, 10 hours of tape and mark places in the studies that illustrated the problems that people were having, and then we would show those highlight tapes to the product managers to convince them that these were really problems that had to be fixed. So you were lucky, Mary Beth.
Well, I was desperate.
The other thing that maybe didn't come out is we were recording on videotape. I mean, we recorded everything on super VHS videotapes, and then when you had to make an edited tape, you'd plug the super. It was an analog tape editor, right? And so you had a spot for the source tape, and then you had the output tape, and so you'd scan forward on the source tape until you found the place you wanted to start the video, and you'd hit a button, and then you scan forward until you found the place where you wanted it to stop, and you'd hit another button, and then you'd hit 2 or 3 other buttons and pray that the video clip that you had tried to edit was actually going onto that target tape. It was challenging. I tell you, that was a rascal. These digital editors today are a godsend. You guys get it really easy.
Click, click, copy, done. That's it. So Jeff, I was told to ask you and the panelists about portable testing, portable labs. Let's talk about those good old portable labs.
Janice has got some great stories. I mean, we had our first effort in portable labs was I bought 2 Samsonite hardback suitcases, and we stuffed them with foam, and then we cut out one of our bright young people cut out the places where each piece of equipment went. So you had to carry a VCR scan converter, you had to carry the microphone, the amplifier thing, 2 speakers. What else? And the video mix. And then you had to carry a monitor that everybody was viewing in another box. And that's the one we used to get such a kick because we didn't have any money, right? So we were checking all the stuff on the airplane and hoping that they wouldn't weigh it. And the monitor was in about a 2-foot by 2-foot blue shipping case. And that sucker would come up out of the baggage claim. It would come up on the conveyor belt and it would rattle down onto the thing that's going around in a circle on the baggage claim, and everybody would scream and run away. And then we'd run up, grab the monitor case, and off we go. I don't know how much that stuff weighed, but it was hard. Janice?
Yeah, there was a guy in Atlanta who was selling portable labs. I think we paid like $30,000 for it. And in one suitcase, it basically had all the components that Jeff was talking about. And it was so heavy. We had to take that on planes. We did a lot of field testing, and we took it on planes, and we were just praying that they weren't going to make us check it because, we were afraid it would get damaged and then we wouldn't have anything on the other end. But and then you had to hope that everything was going to work once you got to wherever you were going and that you could set it up. It was a challenge.
Yeah.
I hear the words hoping and praying a whole lot. Like, just please work, please work.
Yeah. It was something.
Okay, so now let's talk about graphical interfaces and how they've changed. So what were we testing back in the day?
Well, we were testing CUIs as well as, graphical user interfaces were just coming about, and I remember and technology was rapidly changing too. We were just beginning to start to use the mouse You know, there's lots of good stories about people for the very first time picking up a mouse and trying to, you know, point it at the screen like it was a remote control or something. Not really knowing what to do with it. So technology was changing very rapidly, and our user interfaces were becoming more graphical. And I was just talking to someone the other day about, I think, you know, looking back on it, we're developing icons and everything with graphics as much as we could because we could. And we had to have like studies to test whether or not people understood the icons to serve as, you know, metaphors for tasks that they could do or products that they had to interact with. It was a rapidly changing time.
Anybody else?
I remember that I remember testing some doc with hyperlinks for the first time and spending a lot of time stressing out about whether or not people would be able to figure out to click on the hyperlink. What's funny was that after having worked, sorry?
Mary Beth, and you can probably comment on this better than I, but when we were working with freelance, Lotus freelance in the early days, nobody knew who was going to win the GUI war. So you had Microsoft and Windows, you had IBM and OS2, and then you had the Mac. And the poor software manufacturers, they were building software for all three platforms, right?
Yeah. Yes. It was a very expensive way of living for a long time.
Yeah. We only had one computer for a long time in our company. And so if I ever landed mostly we had it on Windows, but if I landed an OS2 project, we had to scrub it, reboot it, install OS2, install the software, and as you said, Adrian, pray.
And pray. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of things. So, you know, y'all are doing this when a lot of people don't know much about it. You know, Jeff, you're having to sell people on it. Janice, I don't know how you got American Airlines to build $750,000 lab back then. So how are you getting buy-in? How are you getting people to sign off on, you know, investing in this usability testing?
It was hard. It really was hard. Like I said, well, I didn't convince American Airlines to build this expensive lab. I think IBM did. And I came in the middle of it being built. But cost justifying usability was a big thing. You know, there were lots of articles, a book written about how to justify the work that we were doing. You know, people didn't even know what usability testing was. A lot of times they confused it with quality assurance testing. So it was a huge education process. Just communicating, demonstrating what usability testing was, why it was important. You know, at that point, the development cycle, it was a waterfall approach, very linear. And we were trying to convince them that it needed to be more iterative, you know, test and make improvements and then test again. So like I said, it took me 4 years to justify getting a dedicated staff. So it wasn't an easy thing.
Mary Beth, did you have trouble getting buy-in at Lotus?
I don't think that we had, I wouldn't describe it as trouble. I had kind of a different approach from the beginning about trying to get developers involved. So instead of being, what I realized really quickly was that I didn't know enough. I didn't understand how to use the product well enough. And so instead of being the person who did the testing, who would then go back and present results to the team, out of sheer desperation, I got people in the room with me doing the testing from the very beginning. So I didn't have to sell it because they pretty rapidly saw the impact of their decisions along the way. One of the things that was funny was one of the first usability setups that I had at Lotus, I actually had one room where I was using sort of as a lab, and my office that I was using as a observation room, and I had cables between the two taped down on the floor. Well, there's nothing that intrigues a developer more than cables. So they were super interested in seeing what was going on because there were cables. The other thing that I did at some point was I had some sort of like device that like measured cycles. There was something that had nothing to do with anything, but it looked super exciting. So they all came in the lab to look at the thing that I was playing with. But then they stayed because they saw their software not working the way they thought that it was. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And their first reaction always was, where did you get this idiot? This is not my target market, right?
Nope. That's not what I did. No, I had a different technique. I didn't write the tasks. I made them write the tasks. Okay. So it was their tasks. And I didn't pick the users. I said, tell me what users you want. So they walked in and it was their tasks and their users. Okay. And they couldn't argue with me because they had already picked them and said and I would show them and be like, is this person okay? And they're like, oh yeah, they're totally our user. And then they couldn't argue with me.
It's actually that's interesting that you bring that up, Mary Beth, because the approach at American Airlines was to have the product managers do their own testing. So we didn't really have to sell it to them. We had to sell it to management. What we were selling was trying to get a dedicated staff. And after 4 years of the product managers doing their own, creating the scenarios, coming up with the users that we were going to test, doing the recruiting. After they did that, they were like, oh, please bring on a dedicated staff.
Well, yours is different, right? Because you're selling UX, or you were selling research. So how are you doing that?
Yeah, it was challenging because we're selling into a market that didn't exist, a product that nobody understood. So I would say our best salesman was video and those edited videos that we could put together because it becomes indisputable evidence. I'll tell you a story. We did a project for Lotus. I don't know. I think it was winter of '91 or something like that. And they commissioned, this is Lotus Freelance, they commissioned a competitive usability test of, I don't know, Aldous Persuasion and whatever. There were 2 or 3 presentation graphics package out there. So we did this competitive study, and I always insisted in going up and presenting the results because, to my mind, that was a built-in sales call. So I'm up at Lotus, and Sharon's with me, and we're pitching in front of Tim Davenport, who was the GM of their graphics division, and Betsy Fortin, who was product manager. She's the one who commissioned the deal. And the 2 of them are in the audience, and I'm up there doing my song and dance, and Sharon's firing up the video, and I would tell her to because you didn't have the ability to crank it, directly out of the presentation. So she fires up a couple of videos, and I'm 10 minutes into this deal, and Davenport says, stop. And I go, oh, your heart drops down at the bottom of whatever. And he said, do you have any more time today? And I said, you name it, I got it. He goes back and he calls up his secretary and he says, I want my entire management team over here in an hour and a half. So I finished the deal for them, for Betsy and Tim Davenport. And it was it's the videos that got them. I mean, when you show 3 or 4 people having the same problem at the same point, it's irrefutable. And it was such a great salesman for us in every single situation.
So y'all are starting to touch on something that is important. So how did you recruit participants for your research studies. So Mary Beth, I liked what you said. You forced the developers, hey, pick these people, right? And then I've also seen some of the things that Jeff talks about where they're like, you go through the screener, you get the right people, and then your developers are like, these aren't it, right? So how were you identifying participants for your research?
You know, I don't remember how we did it at Lotus, but when I went to MathWorks, it was so much easier because MathWorks sold direct. So we knew who all our customers were because we sold it to them ourselves. Whereas Lotus was selling through third parties. And the other thing was that when I was at MathWorks and I called up people and said, "Hi, I'm from MathWorks. Could you help us?" They were, because MathWorks users are groupies, they were so excited to talk to somebody from MathWorks that they were like, "Absolutely, I'd be thrilled to help you work on that product." So it was a very different, like I had a few of those phone calls and I'm like, this is so much more fun.
Anybody else? American Airlines? Janice, what were y'all doing at American Airlines?
Jeff, do you want to go ahead?
I was just saying, I mean, we used to have to recruit to the customer specification. So, you know, if it was a spreadsheet product we were testing, then customers wanted to see people who use spreadsheets test their product. We would just follow their lead.
Did y'all have vendors to go to, Jeff, or did y'all have lists where y'all calling? What were we doing?
No.
Just the list?
Word of mouth. That video you showed at the very beginning, Adrian, that's a buddy of mine, Steve Pratt, lives in Dallas, played golf with him for years. I'd put the arm on these guys. But, you know, we always got people who were representative of the target market, and that was the important thing. The story I was starting to tell was, you know, the developer gets dragged from California to watch his product be tested by the product manager. And we run the first user through, and he's like, you know, this guy's an idiot. This is definitely not my target market. And you run the second person through, and all of a sudden you're finding the same things, right? And then you run the third person through, and now this developer's sitting there taking notes, and I mean, he is in the deal. And at the end of the second day, he gets up and he shakes my hand. He says, "It's an unbelievable experience." He said, "I'm going back and fix everything right now." And so the combination of video and getting them to attend in person, like Mary Beth was saying, that's the name of the game. It sells itself after that.
So the next one here is thinking about the internet, right? And everyone coming online. So how did that impact the work you were doing?
So Janice, I remember at Copper Mountain, we had Birds of a Feather sessions. Copper Mountain was one of the UPA meetings. And I remember we had a Birds of the Feather, it's called, session. And like, anybody want to talk about the web? And like 2/3 of the people at the conference showed up to have that. And everyone was sitting around being like, what is this web thing we have to, anybody doing some web stuff thing? What is this?
I'll tell you, let me tell you my story on the web. So I'm out at Oracle. This is 94, right? I'm out at Oracle, and we had developed a pretty good network of customers out there. And so somebody told somebody about me, and you know, he reached out, and this guy says, "I want to do a usability test on the Oracle store." I said, "Great, we can do that. What's the Oracle store?" He said, "Oh, that's our store on the World Wide Web." I said, "Great. What's the World Wide Web?" He goes, "Oh, that's the graphical area of the internet." Okay. You know, first time I ever heard of it, 1994. But then the impact for us as a vendor of services is instant. I mean, we were making all our money on software companies, Lotus, Moreland, Oracle, Microsoft, et cetera. But now with the web, every company on the planet was now a software company, right? Everybody on the planet had their own product. It was their website. So that's great.
Yeah, I mean, it was different. It was different for us at American because I left American in 1996, and I mean, I can't remember when Travelocity came about, but Travelocity was really the first internet version of booking travel. Prior to that, you know, everything was on a CD-ROM. So, you know, people had to load the software onto their desktops in order to use it. But yeah, so it was later for the internet.
Janice, did you work at Netscape? Didn't you work at Netscape? Am I hallucinating?
Yeah, I did. And I went to Netscape in 1996. Yeah. And so that was, I mean, that was just a totally different experience from what I had at American, obviously.
People don't know what Netscape is, Janice.
I know, it's so so sad.
Okay.
Netscape created a great browser, but you know, Microsoft decided to kill Netscape.
And they did.
And they did.
So this question wasn't on here, so I apologize ahead of time. But what are your thoughts on how user research has evolved since, you know, y'all were figuring it out and making it up and doing literally the heavy lifting? How do you feel like it's evolved since then?
So I think early on, we focused more directly on the user's experience with their direct interaction with the software or the product, whatever it was. And we moved then to later expand our focus to the total user experience. But that was a little bit later. But to tell you the truth, I feel like, I mean, the names have changed, but we're still basically doing today what we've always done. You know, we've been focused on the user, their interaction with the product, the software, the user interface. Our tools have changed and improved and make our jobs easier. But I feel like, you know, today we're doing what we've always done with user research.
No, I think you're absolutely spot on. You know, the breadth of the practice has expanded dramatically, right? Now we got design thinking at the beginning, and you know, we're doing many more different things than we used to, but the fundamental process hasn't changed at all. You stick a human being in front of something that they ought to be able to use, and you see what they can do and they can't do. And then you try to figure out how to get usable.
But Jeff, even with design thinking, I mean, basically design thinking in my mind is using a combination of tools to, you know, figure out, to deeply understand the user, what they're trying to accomplish, and what the objectives are of the problem we're trying to solve. But we always did that. We just, you know, our techniques were called different things. They've improved today. It's easier today. But
I will tell you, there's a lot of organizations that don't get involved early enough, Janice. That was my point. But UX research has now embraced design thinking, and it's becoming more and more popular. And you know, that's what we ought to be doing. If you can get the stuff at the beginning, it's a heck of a lot easier to fix it then.
And I guess that's one of the biggest changes, is that it's not such a challenge today to do it from the beginning, whereas it used to be.
Anything else? So everyone in the audience, we are going to start taking questions in a second. So if you have any, go ahead and drop them in the chat. I guess, let's see. Any other thoughts that y'all want to share? Y'all gave me a really good list. Thank you. Anything else that y'all want to talk about before we go to the chat? No? Okay, get ready. Okay. So what advice would you give researchers and designers today that will make them successful?
So I pulled up a thing I had written a few years ago called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Usability People, which it turns out you can find on the web. Who knew? Because I couldn't remember what exactly I had recommended. But the first thing, and I have actually used this concept in a variety of talks that I've given, is know your customers. But I would say, I think everybody's got at least, I think, 4 or 5 customers that they ought to think about. So you think about the people who pay, you think about the people who are using. I think you should think about your manager as a customer. I think you should think about your team as a customer. And I think you should think about your company as a customer. And so all of those folks have requirements, all of them have needs, all of them have expectations about what you're trying to do. And you will be more successful if you're taking all of those needs into account than you will if you're only trying to meet the needs of one of those sets of customers.
Anybody else have anything to add to that?
Well, you know what Mary,
link to your article in the chat, Mary Beth.
Thank you.
You're about to go viral.
so what Mary Beth said at the beginning, I would just second it. If you want, advice to be successful, get to know the user, get to know what the user wants, get to know what the user is capable of before you start building anything.
And I think the only thing that I would add to that is that sometimes that's done too much on the surface. I think it requires a deeper dive than what a lot of people are doing. We used to do what we called user profiles, and that kind of evolved into personas. But I think one of the things that personas ignored was the details about the skills and the experiences that the users had. It was much more holistic, and you got a better picture of this person and their environment, but it didn't always dive deep enough into understanding the users.
So next question from the chat. Do you all think that Agile has helped or hurt our efforts in UX, specifically research?
Has helped or hurt what?
Our efforts. So the work that UX professionals do, is that easier or difficult now because of Agile? Or at least people's version of Agile, whatever that is.
Well, I think it just accelerates everything to a pace that sometimes makes it very difficult to do what we need to do. I mean, it's good in terms of the iteration, but because things have to be done so much more quickly, sometimes I think it doesn't allow us to spend enough time to get into some of the details.
Yeah, it's to get a team of Agile developers to stop even for a day to take a look at UX research. But if they do, the product is going to end up so much better, so much better.
So we didn't cover this, and I'll get to the rest of the questions in the chat, but it just made me think about something. So Jeff, when you got started and you're hiring a team of people, right? Myself and quite a few of the people on the call today fall into this category. I don't know if it's because we were in Dallas or whatnot, but you didn't necessarily have a pool of what's the word I want to use? Academic researchers, right? People who were trained to do UX research.
No.
So how did you find us? How did you know people had the skill sets you needed to do this type of work?
As a vendor, wanting customers to work with you and enjoy the experience, we were looking for people with technical aptitude. They had to be able to learn a product quickly and adapt that to a test environment. We were looking for people with personality. We were looking for people who would be fun to work with. And so there were 2 or 3 that we looked for, and we've been pretty successful in finding those folks. I mean, we've hired people from all different persuasions, different majors. We really didn't care what their background was. We taught them our process, and we taught them how to do what we do, and they got very good at it, or they weren't employed very long. We've swung and missed, but I think we've been spot on more often than not.
So Janice, Mary Beth, did y'all have that issue? So I know Janice, you were talking, it took you about 4 years to even have a pool of people or to get to where you were hiring people to do that. Project managers did that. So did you have skilled researchers that you could go to, or were you doing kind of like Jeff and training them up the way you wanted them to be?
When I finally got to hire the staff, I hired people who had backgrounds in typically human factors, cognitive psychology, but or graphic design. But my master's was in technical communication, and I felt like the courses that I had taken, I had psychology courses and programming courses. I felt like those enabled me to do the job effectively. There's a lot of technical communicators out there who became user experience people, user-centered user interface designers. So, I don't necessarily believe that you have to have that specific background or educational experience. It takes a person who, in my mind, it takes a person who has good insights into understanding people and good interviewing skills, good listening skills.
Yep.
All of those things are very important. On top of understanding, I mean, it's always good to have that background to know about how people think and behave. I mean, that's a nice to have.
So I guess this will be our last question. So one of the questions here from the chat is around kind of this idea that now everybody does research, right? So you have some organizations where their project manager or products managers are doing research again, so we've come full circle. You have teams where your designers are doing research, and I think one company calls it a UX Sherpa. You have a researcher who just kind of teaches everybody else to do research and just kind of keeps them on rails. So do you all have any thoughts on kind of how this is going around? Everyone is now doing research in some form or fashion. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that's part of why I stopped doing it. I switched careers about 7 or 8 years ago because I didn't like the direction it was headed. I would have conversations with people where they're like, well, this isn't so hard. It's just, why can't everybody do it? To which I would respond to the developers, I don't understand what's so hard about coding. It's just typing. What's the problem?
The danger of everybody doing their own research is, I can't tell you how many times I've had developers of a product, we'd find a problem and the developer would try to explain to me why they did it that way. Well, quite frankly, I don't give a damn. They can't figure it out, so you need to fix it, right? But, some of that's a good thing. Too much of it, it becomes incestuous, I think.
I think there's a lot to be said for being familiar with research methodology. you know, when people say they do user research, they might mean, well, I asked them a question about, you know, how they did something or what they thought, and they took that information to be a good research method. So I guess the danger in everybody doing it is that it kind of dilutes good research methodology.
Okay. All right, so we are at the bottom of the hour. Is there any other lasting thought you would like to leave with the team or with the audience today? We'll start with you, Jeff.
Well, it's been a very interesting ride, and quite frankly, when I started this business very naively, thought the world would beat a path to our door, and it wasn't true. But we made an impact, and to see UX become such a prevalent practice is very rewarding. Quite frankly, I've enjoyed it. Enjoyed the ride.
Mary Beth?
I would say it's, I think we won the war. I mean, there's certainly still places where there's reluctance, but people understand the concept. It's practiced in a lot more places. It's very wide now. And I think that's goodness.
Janice?
That is goodness. You know, I think back when we started, there weren't journals, there weren't books, there was nothing that we had to go to learn about user research, and the abundance of materials that are available. You know, it's made jobs so much easier. It is encouraging how far we've come, but I think we still have a long ways to go. I'm always amazed when I hear stories from people, and they make me think about how it was when we began, you know, that it was basically the same. So in a way, we've come so far, but we still have to keep going.
Always educating, always teaching. That is part of our job, right? Perfect. Okay, well, we probably could have done this a whole nother hour. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and telling us stories. If you are on the call today, we will have a recording available on our website here in the next couple of days. If you have any questions, feel free to send them to me and I'll share them with the team and see if we can get them posted on social media for you. We might even have Jeff posting next week, maybe not. All right, y'all have a great one. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.